The mountain wind screamed through the pines as Miriam Kessler stepped into the path of a charging horse. Elliot Gann pulled hard on the reins, but the black gelding was already too close. Its front legs rose above her, iron shoes flashing in the cold morning light, and for one terrible second, Miriam saw nothing but the animal's broad chest and the white fear in its eyes. She did not move. She stood in the road with her faded scarf whipping loose from her dark hair and both hands raised, as if she could stop the whole mountain by herself. The horse came down so near that dirt struck her skirt. Elliot leaned from the saddle, breathless and angry. "Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. Miriam looked up at him with tears running over her round, tired face. She had spent 3 years lowering her eyes whenever the people of Black Hollow laughed at her. She had learned to swallow every insult before it became a reply. But now she caught Elliot's bridle in both hands and held on. "Don't ride through Widow's Pass," she said. "They're waiting beyond the ridge, and if you go any farther, you will not come home alive." Black Hollow was a small settlement pressed between 2 shoulders of the Bitterroot Mountains, where spring came late, and winter always seemed to be waiting just beyond the next cloud. The town had one muddy street, a bank with a bright brass sign, a church, a feed store, a sheriff's office, and a long cookhouse built from black pine logs. Smoke hung over the roofs most mornings. It smelled of coal, wet bark, horses, and whatever Miriam had in the ovens before sunrise. Travelers often called the place beautiful when they first arrived. They saw silver peaks above the trees and clear water moving over stone. They did not stay long enough to notice how quickly a quiet town could turn cold toward anyone who did not fit inside its narrow idea of respectability. Miriam had been awake since 4 that morning. By the time the first light touched the ridge, she had mixed 40 biscuits, cut potatoes for stew, carried 2 buckets from the pump, and pulled a heavy pan of cornbread from the iron oven. Heat rolled through the cookhouse, gathering beneath her plain brown dress. She was 36 years old, broad through the shoulders and hips, with a full belly and strong arms shaped by years of lifting flour, wood, and cast-iron pots. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a faded blue scarf that had once belonged to her mother. A few loose strands always escaped around her face. There were shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of sleep seemed able to soften. "Move aside, Miriam. You're blocking half the room again." Wade Pritch, one of the freight drivers, squeezed behind her, though there was plenty of space on the other side of the table. 2 men near the stove laughed. Wade took a biscuit from the tray without asking and turned it over in his hand. "Surprised any food gets past you and reaches the plates." Miriam kept cutting onions. The knife moved in a steady rhythm against the board. Once, years before, she might have told Wade that she ate less than most of the men she fed. She might have pointed out that her work began hours before his and ended hours after it. She had learned that an answer only gave cruel people another door to walk through. "Careful," said Lem Dorsey from his chair. Her husband tried walking around her and fell clean off a mountain. The laughter grew louder. Someone struck the table with the flat of his hand. Miriam's knife stopped. The onion blurred in front of her. Aaron had been dead for 3 years, yet the town still found fresh ways to use his death against her. The cookhouse owner, Mrs. Vale, stood behind the counter counting coins. She heard every word, but she did not look up. Miriam waited for the woman to say enough. She waited for any decent voice in the room to rise. None did. "Stew will be ready at noon," Miriam said quietly. Then she gathered the chopped onions and carried them to the pot. Wade called after her, "Make 2 kettles. One for the town and one for yourself." Miriam heard the laughter follow her into the pantry. She closed the door, set both hands on a flour barrel, and breathed until the burning behind her eyes passed. She would not cry where they could hear. She had given Black Hollow enough pieces of herself already. When Aaron was alive, he used to meet her at the cookhouse door after the evening meal. He was a lean, thoughtful man with gentle grey eyes and a habit of keeping notes on any scrap of paper he could find. He worked as a survey assistant and part-time clerk, checking boundary marks for the ranches scattered through the valley. He could walk 20 miles over rough ground and still come home smiling. People had respected him then, or Miriam had believed they did. After his body was found below North Ridge, Sheriff Calder Voss called it a tragic fall. Aaron's boots had slipped on frost, he said. There had been no reason for a formal inquiry. Miriam had seen the dark bruise behind Aaron's ear. She had seen mud on the back of his coat, even though the ridge trail had been frozen hard. She had asked why his survey bag was missing, and why his left boot had been found 50 feet above the place where they claimed he fell. Sheriff Voss had rested one hand on her shoulder and spoken in the slow voice people used with children. "Grief makes the mind search for enemies, Mrs. Kessler. Go home and rest." She had gone to banker Silas Bell because Aaron sometimes worked on land records for the bank. Bell told her that a woman in distress could imagine almost anything. She went to Bram Harker, the largest rancher in the valley, who had been seen speaking with Aaron the day before his death. Harker looked her up and down, then said Aaron might have kept his balance if he had not spent his life carrying the worries of a demanding wife. By the end of the week, the story had changed. Aaron had not simply fallen. According to the whispers, he had been exhausted from working to feed Miriam. According to others, he had climbed the ridge to escape an unhappy home. No one said these things to her with kindness. They said them with smiles. Miriam stopped asking questions in public. She sold the small cabin she had shared with Aaron to settle debts she had never known existed, then rented a single room behind the cookhouse. She kept his coat, his pocket watch, and a small wooden box of papers that seemed to mean nothing. She also kept watching. Silence made people careless. Men who would lower their voices around a schoolteacher or merchant often spoke freely near Miriam, as if a large widow carrying dirty plates were part of the furniture. That morning, after the breakfast crowd left, Miriam scrubbed the tables and swept mud toward the door. Mrs. Vale departed for the church committee meeting, leaving Miriam alone to prepare the noon meal. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The cookhouse felt peaceful at last. Miriam hummed under her breath while she kneaded bread. It was an old tune Aaron used to whistle when he sharpened his pencils. Near 10 o'clock, the rear door opened. Miriam expected a delivery boy, but 3 sets of boots crossed the floor. She recognized the voices before she reached the pantry door. "Close the front curtains," Sheriff Voss said. "No one comes in before noon," Silas Bell answered. "The widow is usually at the pump by now." Miriam froze. She was not at the pump because rain had filled the barrel beneath the roof spout. Through a thin crack beside the pantry hinge, she saw the sheriff remove his wet hat. Silas Bell sat at the nearest table, his pale hands folded over a silver-topped cane. Bram Harker remained by the stove. He was a square man with a heavy mustache and a deep voice that carried through walls. "Gann leaves his ranch at 11, Harker said. "He'll take Widow's Pass because the creek road is flooded." "And your men understand what to do?" Bell asked. "A loose stone, a frightened horse, and a long fall. Mountains collect careless riders every year. Voss knows that better than anyone." The sheriff gave a low laugh. Miriam's fingers tightened around the pantry shelf. Bell placed a folded paper on the table. "Once Elliot Gann is gone, this deed establishes that he transferred the North Pasture to the Black Hollow Cattle Company in payment of his loan." "He never took a loan," Harker said. "Paper remembers what I tell it to remember. By the time his sister hears the news in Oregon, the ranch will be divided, fenced, and sold." Miriam could hear the blood beating in her ears. For a moment, she was no longer in the pantry. She was kneeling beside Aaron beneath a white sheet, touching the bruise behind his ear, while Sheriff Voss told her that grief made foolish stories. "What about the widow?" Harker asked suddenly. Miriam stopped breathing. "Which widow?" Bell said. "Kessler. She watches people. Aaron did the same before he fell." Sheriff Voss glanced toward the pantry. Miriam stepped backward without sound. "She watches because no one talks to her," he said, "and no one listens when she talks. Leave her alone, unless she gives us reason not to." Bell tapped his cane against the floor. "Then let us avoid giving her a reason. Gann must enter the pass before noon. After that, this valley belongs to us. Miriam waited until the men left through the rear door. She heard their horses move away through the rain. Her knees gave way, and she sat hard on a sack of beans. Every lesson Black Hollow had taught her pulled in one direction. Stay quiet. Do not invite ridicule. Do not accuse men whose names carry more weight than yours. She pictured Elliot Gann riding beneath the narrow cliffs of Widow's Pass. She saw Aaron's still face. She knew exactly what silence would cost. Miriam stood. She pulled on her old wool coat, forgot her hat, and ran. People turned as she hurried down the muddy street. Her boots slipped, and her breath came hard, but she did not slow. Wade Pritch leaned outside the feed store and called, "Cookhouse is the other way, Miriam." She ignored him. At the edge of town, the road rose toward a dark line of pines. Elliot would leave his ranch and meet it from the western trail. If she failed to reach the fork first, he would be inside the pass before she could warn him. The rain faded, but wind shook water from the branches. Miriam climbed until pain pulled at her sides. Once she stopped beside a boulder, pressing a hand to her chest. She could almost hear the town laughing behind her. She could hear Harker's old words about Aaron carrying the worries of a demanding wife. Then she imagined another body at the foot of a ridge and forced herself forward. She reached the fork as hoofbeats sounded beyond the trees. Elliot's black gelding came around the bend at a fast trot. Miriam stepped into the road, waved both arms, and shouted his name. The horse startled and surged. That was how she came to stand beneath its raised front legs, with terror in her throat, and the whole future of the valley balanced on whether Elliot Gann believed her. After she warned him, Elliot stared at her from the saddle. He was 40 years old, weathered and tall, with a quiet face that rarely showed alarm. He ran the Blue Cedar Ranch alone, except for 2 hired brothers and an older housekeeper. People trusted him because he paid on time, spoke plainly, and never seemed eager to own more land than he could care for. He had also known Sheriff Voss for 12 years. "Who is waiting?" he asked. Miriam looked back toward town. "Men hired by Bram Harker. Sheriff Voss knows. Silas Bell made a false deed for your north pasture. I heard them in the cookhouse." Elliot's expression changed, but not in the way she hoped. Doubt settled over it. "Calder Voss pulled me out of a river when I was 28. Silas carried my note through 2 bad winters. Harker and I have traded cattle since before this town had a church. I know. You are asking me to believe all 3 planned my death within earshot of a public kitchen." Miriam released his bridle. Her courage began to drain away. She saw herself as he must see her, soaked, red-faced, gasping, and making a wild accusation against the most respected men in Black Hollow. "They thought I was at the pump," she said. "They said no one listens when I talk." They were right about that part. Elliot looked toward the pass. Clouds moved across the ridge in long gray bands. Did they say where the men would be? Beyond the split rock, where the trail narrows above the gorge. They said a loose stone and a frightened horse would explain it. His gelding shifted beneath him. Elliot rubbed the animal's neck, thinking, "There is another trail to my ranch from here. Take it, please. You can call me a liar tomorrow, but you must live through today first." Something in her voice reached him. Elliot swung down from the saddle. "You cannot walk back alone if they see you here. Ride behind me." Miriam stepped away. "The horse cannot carry us both." Elliot's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in understanding. "Ash carried 2 elk quarters last winter, and neither one warned me away from an ambush." "Put your foot in the stirrup." The answer was so simple that Miriam had no defense against it. He did not make a joke. He did not pretend not to understand why she had refused. He tied her coat closed where a button had torn loose, then helped her mount behind him. Miriam held the back of the saddle at first, afraid to place her weight against him. When Ash climbed the steep side trail, Elliot reached back and pulled her arms firmly around his waist. "I would rather arrive rumpled than lose you down the slope," he said. They took an old logging path through dense trees. Half a mile above Widow's Pass, Elliot stopped where they could look down through an opening in the pines. 2 riders waited behind the split rock. One held a rifle across his saddle. The other had stretched a rope low between 2 trees where a running horse would strike it. Elliot watched them for a long time. The disbelief left his face slowly, replaced by a stillness that frightened Miriam more. "I know those men," he said. "They work Harker's south range." One rider glanced uphill. Elliot guided Ash back beneath the branches before they were seen. He turned the horse toward Blue Cedar Ranch without another word. The ranch sat in a wide meadow surrounded by cedar and fir. Its house was plain, with a deep porch and a stone chimney, while the barn stood 50 yards away near a frozen pond. Elliot took Miriam directly to the barn. He barred the doors, then lit a lantern, even though daylight entered through the high windows. The warm smell of hay and horses settled around them. "Tell me every word," he said. Miriam did. She repeated the conversation from the moment the men entered the cookhouse. Her memory had always been exact. Aaron once said she could hold a page in her mind after reading it only twice. She described the false deed, the north pasture, the flooded road, and Bell's claim that paper remembered whatever he told it to remember. Elliot paced beside an empty stall. "If Bell forged my name, the deed may already be filed. He manages half the land notes in the county. Voss controls any local inquiry, and Harker has 20 riders who depend on him. My word against theirs will not be enough." "No," Miriam said. "It will not." He stopped. "You have thought about this before." She looked at the lantern. "For 3 years." Miriam told him about the bruise behind Aaron's ear and the missing survey bag. She described the mud, the misplaced boot, and the way Sheriff Voss had closed the matter before the ground beneath Aaron's body was even searched. Elliot listened without interrupting. "Aaron was frightened during his last month," she said. "He began locking the door in daylight. He wrote late at night, but if I entered the room, he covered the pages. I thought he was hiding money troubles. I was hurt that he did not trust me. The night before he died, he told me that if anything happened, I should look where hunger sleeps. I thought it was one of his strange little sayings. I searched our pantry, the root cellar, even the chicken shed. I found nothing. 'Where hunger sleeps,'" Elliot repeated. Could he have meant the cookhouse? Miriam looked up. Aaron had helped repair the cookhouse floor one summer. At that time, she worked there only 2 days a week. He often joked that the great flour chest slept all night and woke hungry every morning. "The flour bin," she whispered. They waited until dark to return to town. Elliot left Ash at a line shack and entered Black Hollow on foot with Miriam. Rain had started again, soft enough to hide their steps. The cookhouse windows were dark. Miriam kept a key because she lit the ovens each morning. Her hand shook so badly that Elliot had to shield the lock while she worked it. Inside, the building seemed changed. Every table cast a human-shaped shadow. Every creak sounded like a boot on the porch. Miriam led Elliot into the pantry and moved sacks away from the old flour chest. It was nearly 5 feet long and built into the wall. She ran her fingers beneath the lower edge, feeling nothing but rough wood.
"He said hunger sleeps,"
she murmured. "Not where food sleeps." Elliot lifted the lid. The chest was half full. Miriam plunged both arms into the flour, searching through the cold white powder until her fingers touched oilcloth. Deep beneath the flour lay a narrow packet tied with twine. She carried it to the kitchen table. Flour covered her sleeves and lay across her scarf like snow. Inside the oilcloth was a leather ledger, several survey maps, and a letter bearing Aaron's handwriting. A dark brown stain marked one corner of the book. Miriam knew what it was before she touched it. The stain had soaked through several pages. Her knees weakened. Elliot moved a chair behind her, and she sat. The letter was addressed to her. "My dearest Miriam," she read, her voice uneven. "I have found a pattern in the Valley records that I can no longer mistake for error. Homesteads are being taken through false debt, false death, or fear. Bell changes the papers. Harker takes the land. Voss makes honest questions disappear. I have copied what I can. If I am wrong, forgive my secrecy. If I am right, forgive me for placing this burden near you. I hid it where no proud man in Black Hollow would think to search, beneath the flower, handled by the woman they refused to see. Miriam stopped. The last words blurred beneath her tears. Elliot finished the page quietly. Aaron had listed 6 ranches, 4 missing homesteaders, and payments made to names that did not belong to any living men in the valley. He wrote that the original proof was stored in an abandoned survey cabin near Coldwater Lake. He had planned to bring it to a territorial judge in Helena. The letter ended before he could name the person he trusted to carry it. "This is enough to make them afraid," Elliot said, turning the blood-stained ledger toward the light. "But maybe not enough to convict them. Most entries are in Aaron's hand. Bell will call them lies made by a dead man." Then we find the original records. Coldwater Lake is 2 days into the high country. Snow will close the upper trail soon. Miriam folded Aaron's letter along its old crease. "He died trying to reach that cabin. I have spent 3 years hearing that his death was my fault. I will not spend another winter wondering what waits there." Elliot studied her face. "You understand that Voss may already know you warned me. I understand what happens when fear keeps good people quiet." They wrapped the ledger again and left by the rear door. Elliot wanted Miriam to stay at Blue Cedar, but she refused until she could collect Aaron's things. They agreed that she would act as if nothing had happened while he gathered supplies. At dawn, he would meet her behind the old church. Miriam slept little. Every sound outside her room pulled her upright. Shortly before sunrise, something scraped beneath her door. She waited, then lit a lamp. A narrow strip of paper lay on the floor. 3 words had been written in charcoal. "Widows fall too." She held the warning over the lamp flame until it curled black. Her fear did not disappear. It settled deeper, becoming something hard and useful. At breakfast, Sheriff Voss entered the cookhouse and took his usual seat. Miriam poured his coffee. He watched her with friendly blue eyes. "Heard you took a walk toward the Western Fork yesterday," he said. "I needed pine tips for Mrs. Vale's cough syrup. In the rain, coughs do not wait for clear weather." Voss smiled and added sugar to his cup. "Did you happen to see Elliot Gann?" Miriam met his eyes. Her heart struck against her ribs, but her hand remained steady around the coffee pot. "Why would Mr. Gann notice a woman like me?" The sheriff's smile widened. "No reason at all." For the first time, Miriam understood that the town's contempt could be used as cover. They had made her invisible. Now she would decide what the invisible woman saw. She left after the breakfast dishes were washed. All she carried was a bedroll, Aaron's wooden box, a spare dress, and food from her own small cupboard. Mrs. Vale complained that the noon stew would suffer. She did not ask why Miriam's face looked pale. Elliot waited behind the church with 2 horses and a pack mule. He had brought a gentle chestnut mare named Penny for Miriam. When Miriam said she had not ridden since childhood, he adjusted the stirrups and walked beside her until she found her balance. He never sighed or hurried her. They crossed the creek north of town and followed a narrow trail into the mountains. Pine needles softened the sound of the horses. Mist drifted between the trunks. From higher ground, Black Hollow looked small and harmless. A few roofs gathered around a pale thread of road. Miriam wondered how so much fear had fit inside such a little place. Near midday, they found a sheet of paper nailed to a tree. A black circle had been drawn around Elliot's name. Beneath it, someone had written, "Turn home before the widow buries another man." Elliot tore it down. "They are following close enough to reach the trail ahead of us. Or someone else is warning us." He looked at the words again. "This is not written like a threat." Miriam noticed the nail. It was a thin, square nail used in schoolroom repairs, not the broad ranch nails Harker's men carried. She thought of Ruth Bellamy, the young teacher who boarded above the feed store. Ruth's father had vanished from his homestead 5 years earlier. The official story said he abandoned his land after failing to repay Silas Bell. Ruth never believed it. "Someone in town may know more than we do," Miriam said. "And they may be too frightened to sign a name." They pressed on. By evening, the trail had climbed above the mist. Elliot made camp in a hollow hidden by cedar trees. Miriam cooked beans over a small fire. The work calmed her. Elliot repaired a strap while she stirred the pot. "Why did you believe me?" she asked. "I did not. Not at first. I know." He set down the strap. "I believed your fear. People can invent words, but they rarely invent fear like that. And you stepped in front of a horse. A liar usually protects herself better." Miriam gave a tired laugh. "The town would say I was too slow to move. The town says many things because it saves them the trouble of thinking." She served the beans into tin bowls. "You have never joined them, but you never stopped them either." Elliot's gaze lowered. The fire shifted between them. "No," he said. "I did not." Miriam expected an excuse. He offered none. "I told myself their talk was foolish and beneath notice," he continued. "That was comfortable for me. It was not harmless for you." The simple honesty reached a place inside her that anger could not. Miriam stared into her bowl. "Aaron used to speak for me. After he died, every room became louder. Then perhaps it is time the room heard your own voice. I am not sure I remember how it sounds. You used it on the road yesterday. It stopped a horse. They slept in turns. Near midnight, Penny gave a nervous whinny. Elliot rose with his rifle, but no one entered the camp. At dawn, they found boot prints near the trees and a small strip of red cloth caught on a branch. Harker's riders wore red neckerchiefs. The upper trail grew steep. Snow remained in shaded places, and the horses picked their way over loose rock. Miriam's legs ached from the saddle. She said nothing until Elliot noticed her hands trembling. "We stop here," he said. "We are losing daylight. A tired rider makes a poor witness. 10 minutes. He helped her down beside a spring. Miriam drank and washed her face. In the clear water, she saw a worn woman with wind-reddened cheeks and flour still caught beneath one fingernail. She did not see the monster Black Hollow described. She saw someone afraid who had continued anyway. By late afternoon, they reached Coldwater Lake. It lay dark beneath the cliffs, smooth as polished iron. The survey cabin stood among the trees on the far shore. Its shutters were closed, and a rusted chain crossed the front door. Elliot examined the lock. "It has been opened recently. See the fresh marks?" Miriam looked at the ground. Several boot tracks crossed the old needles, but last night's frost made them hard to read. One set led behind the cabin. They followed it to a shallow hollow where the remains of a campfire were still warm. "They reached it before us," Miriam whispered. Elliot drew his revolver, but kept it pointed toward the earth. They circled the cabin. No horse waited nearby. No smoke rose from the chimney. At last, Elliot broke the lock with the flat end of a hatchet. The inside smelled of dust, old paper, and damp wood. A table had been overturned. Shelves stood empty. Someone had torn open a mattress and scattered its straw across the floor. Miriam's hope sank. "They searched it," she said. "That does not mean they found what Aaron hid." Miriam stood in the center of the room and tried to imagine her husband there. Aaron never trusted obvious hiding places. He had placed his ledger beneath flour because proud men ignored kitchen work. What would he choose in a survey cabin? On one wall hung a faded map of the valley. Small holes marked the land boundaries. Miriam moved closer. One boundary line had been redrawn, but the pinhole beneath it showed the original position. She lifted the map. Behind it, the wall boards were solid. Elliot searched the stove and floor. Nothing. Miriam read the handwritten labels along the map. Coldwater Lake, North Ridge, Blue Cedar, Harker Range, Black Hollow. At the bottom, Aaron had written the surveyor's rule he often quoted at home. "Begin from the point that does not move." "The point that does not move," she said. Elliot looked up. "A survey starts from a fixed marker." They went outside. 50 yards from the cabin stood a stone marker driven deep into the earth. It was too heavy to shift by hand. Elliot cleared moss from its base and found a small metal plate set into one side. Behind the plate was a narrow hollow packed with rolled documents. Miriam pulled them out one by one. There were original homestead deeds bearing county seals, bank receipts, letters signed by Voss, and a list of payments from Harker to hired riders. One deed belonged to Ruth Bellamy's father. Another belonged to a family named Ortega, who had disappeared after their barn burned. Each record had a matching false copy in Aaron's ledger. At the bottom lay his survey bag. Miriam knew the cracked leather strap. She pressed it against her chest. Inside was Aaron's brass compass, its glass broken, and a torn piece of Bram Harker's coat, with 2 brass buttons still attached. There was also a small notebook. Aaron's last entry had been written on the morning he died. Voss asked me to meet him at North Ridge. Says he will help take the evidence to Judge Harlan. I want to believe him. If I do not return, he has chosen Belle. Miriam sat in the grass. She had imagined this truth for 3 years, but knowing it struck differently. Hope had left a small door open inside her. Perhaps Aaron had slipped. Perhaps no one had meant to harm him. The words in his notebook closed that door. He trusted Voss, she said, just as you did. Elliot crouched beside her. I am sorry. They met him on the ridge. He thought the sheriff would help. A branch snapped among the trees. Elliot pulled Miriam behind the stone marker as a rifle shot cracked across the lake. Bark burst from a cedar above them. Elliot did not fire back. He grabbed the document bundle and guided Miriam toward a low bank. Stay below the rocks, he said. 2 men moved between the trees near the cabin. Miriam recognized one as Harker's foreman, Cale Rusk. The other wore a red cloth over his lower face. They were too far from the horses. The open shore offered no cover. Miriam noticed a narrow stream entering the lake behind them. Brush grew thick along its banks. Aaron's map showed an old water channel, she whispered. It runs behind the ridge. They crawled into the brush and followed the stream uphill. Cold water soaked Miriam's skirt. The bank became steep, and Elliot offered his hand. She pushed forward on her own until the ground crumbled beneath one boot. Elliot caught her arm before she fell. Behind them, Cale shouted, "Leave the papers and walk away, Gann. This is not your fight." Elliot called back, "You waited with a rope in Widow's Pass. That made it my fight." Another shot struck stone, far enough away to be a warning. Miriam and Elliot climbed until they reached an old wooden gate built into the channel. Water pressed against it from a narrow holding pond above. "Logging dam," Elliot said. "Rotten, but still holding." Miriam looked at the rusted release lever. "If it opens, the stream will flood the lower path." Together they pulled. The lever resisted, then gave with a deep groan. The gate rose several inches. Water rushed through the channel, swelling around their boots before racing downhill. Cale and the other man cursed as the sudden flow cut across their path. It would not harm them, but it bought enough time. Miriam and Elliot reached the horses from the upper side of the lake. They rode until darkness covered the trail. Neither spoke of courage. There was no need. Fear rode with them, but it no longer held the reins. They returned to Blue Cedar near dawn. Elliot's housekeeper, Ada Pierce, opened the door before they knocked. She was a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a straight back. "You have 6 armed men searching the road, and a sheriff telling town that Mrs. Kessler kidnapped you," she said. "I assume breakfast should be large." For the first time in 2 days, Miriam smiled. They spread the documents across Elliot's kitchen table. Ada made coffee, while Miriam matched each original to Aaron's notes. The pattern reached back 9 years. Belle had created false loans against isolated ranches. Harker threatened families who questioned them. Voss ruled disappearances, fires, and deaths accidental. The stolen land was transferred through the Black Hollow Cattle Company, whose owners were hidden behind false names. "A territorial judge will need living witnesses," Elliot said. "Paper proves theft. People must connect the 3 men to threats and violence." Miriam thought of the silent rooms in Black Hollow. There are witnesses. They have simply been taught that speaking costs too much. Ada set a cup beside her. Then someone must show them silence costs more. Before noon, A rider approached under a white cloth. It was Ruth Bellamy. The schoolteacher slid from her saddle, pale and shaking. She had written the warnings. While repairing a cabinet at school, she heard Voss questioning a boy whose father worked for Harker. The sheriff wanted to know whether Miriam had returned. Ruth took school nails and rode ahead to leave the notes. "My father did not abandon me," Ruth said, when Miriam showed her the original deed. Her finger rested on his signature. "Bell told everyone he ran from debt. I was 14. People looked at me as if dishonor passed through blood. Aaron believed your father was forced from his land," Miriam said. "We will find out where he went." Ruth shook her head. "I know where. A letter reached me last winter from Spokane. He is alive. He was ashamed to return with nothing. I hid the letter because Voss opens the town mail. That living testimony changed everything. Ruth's father could tell a judge how Harker's men drove him out, but Spokane was too far away. They needed a hearing quickly, before Bell destroyed the county records or Harker scattered his men. Elliot sent one hired brother south to the telegraph station with a message for Judge Samuel Harlan, the circuit official due in Pine Crossing within the week. The other rode to trusted ranches with quiet invitations. Miriam and Ruth began copying the documents by hand, so no single fire could erase the proof. For 3 days, Blue Cedar became a place of whispers and arriving horses. Families came after dark. Tomas Ortega, the youngest son of the missing Ortega family, had survived the barn fire because he was visiting relatives. He told Miriam that Voss forced his parents to sign a blank paper before ordering them out of the territory. May and Jacob Webb described how Bell changed the amount on their loan after they paid it. An elderly trapper had seen Sheriff Voss ride toward North Ridge with Aaron on the day Aaron died. He had kept silent because Voss once threatened to jail him for poaching. Miriam listened to each person at the kitchen table. She did not rush them. She understood how shame twisted memory and made plain words difficult. When people faltered, she poured coffee and waited. "Why are you doing this for us?" May Webb asked. Miriam looked around at the copied deeds, the tired faces, and Aaron's compass beside her hand. "Because someone should have done it for my husband." On the 4th evening, the pressure became too much. A stone broke the barn window. A paper wrapped around it warned Elliot to surrender the originals by midnight. Later, they discovered a fence cut and 3 horses missing. No one was hurt, but every sound made the witnesses turn toward the door. Miriam carried blankets to the barn, where several families were sleeping away from the house windows. She found Elliot alone in an empty stall, checking the latch. Dust floated through the lantern light. "Judge Harlan answered," he said. "He will hold a public hearing in Black Hollow 2 days from now. Voss has been ordered not to interfere. Will he obey?" "No." Miriam set down the blankets. Her hands had begun to shake again. "They will laugh when I stand up. Let them." "You say that as if it makes no difference." Her voice rose before she could stop it. "You do not know what it is to enter a room and feel every person measure how much space you take. You do not know what it is to ask for justice and watch a man's eyes move over your body before he decides your words cannot be serious. They said Aaron died because he was tired of carrying me. Some days I believed them. The confession opened something she had held shut for years." Miriam pressed both hands to her face, but the sob escaped. "I wondered whether he climbed that ridge because home had become too heavy. I wondered if I had asked too much of him, and when the town looked at me, I thought perhaps they saw a truth I could not." Elliot did not tell her to calm down. He did not reach for her until she lowered her hands. Then he stood close enough that she could step away if she wished. "Aaron hid the truth beneath your flower," he said. "He trusted your strength when he could trust no office in this valley. You ran up a mountain road to save a man who had never defended you. You crossed cold water while armed men followed. You have given frightened people a safe place to speak. Nothing about that is a burden." Miriam's breath shook. "Your courage saved my life," Elliot continued. "Your mind may save every family whose land they stole. If Black Hollow refused to see your value, that is proof of the town's failure, not yours. The grief came for Aaron, for the years alone, and for every meal she had served to people who treated her pain as entertainment. Elliot remained beside her, without trying to end it. When the tears finally slowed, he handed her a clean handkerchief. "What if my voice fails at the hearing?" she asked. "Then take a breath and begin again. The truth will wait for you." Miriam looked toward the open barn door. Beyond it, the mountains stood dark against the evening sky. "I do not want revenge that leaves another widow in this valley." "Neither do I." "Then we bring them down with records and witnesses. No private justice. No ridge accidents." Elliot held out his hand. Agreed. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady, but the choice was hers. The morning of the hearing arrived under a clear blue sky. Judge Harlan entered Black Hollow in a covered wagon, guarded by 4 territorial marshals. News had traveled through the valley, drawing ranchers, miners, merchants, and families into town. The church was the only building large enough to hold them all. Benches filled before 10. People stood along the walls and crowded near the open windows. Sheriff Voss wore his badge and greeted the judge as if nothing were wrong. Silas Bell sat beside his attorney at the front table, dressed in a black coat with a pearl pin at his throat. Bram Harker arrived with a dozen riders, though the marshals made them leave their weapons outside. Miriam entered through the center aisle carrying Aaron's ledger. Conversation dropped, then rose in whispers. "There she is. Kessler's widow started all this." Surprised, the floor holds. The last remark came from Wade Pritch. It was not loud, but nearby people heard. A few laughed from habit. Miriam stopped. Every old instinct told her to keep walking with her eyes down. Instead, she turned. "The floor has held me every morning while I cooked your breakfast," she said. Her voice carried farther than she expected. "Today, it only needs to hold the truth." No one laughed again. Elliot walked several steps behind her, not ahead. Ruth Bellamy and the other witnesses followed. Ada carried the copies in a wooden case. They took their seats on the left side of the church. Judge Harlan called the hearing to order. He was a thin man with white hair and a patient expression. He explained that the proceeding would determine whether criminal charges and federal land actions were required. Then he looked at Miriam. "Mrs. Kessler, I am told the first evidence came from you. You may begin." Miriam stood. The room seemed to tilt. She saw Mrs. Vale near the rear, avoiding her gaze. She saw men who had laughed about Aaron. She saw Sheriff Voss watching with a small, calm smile, as if he still believed silence belonged to him. Miriam opened the ledger. 3 years ago, my husband, Aaron Kessler, was found below North Ridge, she said. Sheriff Voss called his death an accident before anyone searched the ground or asked why his survey bag was missing. I asked this town for help. Some ignored me. Some laughed. Some decided my body made my grief foolish. They were wrong. She told the story in order. She spoke of Aaron's last weeks, the hidden ledger, and the conversation she overheard at the cookhouse. Bell's attorney objected that a grieving widow could not be trusted to repeat private words accurately. Judge Harlan looked over his spectacles. Her marital status has no bearing on her memory. The objection is denied. Miriam continued. She described the men waiting in Widow's Pass. Elliot testified that he had seen them and identified Harker's foreman. A marshal produced the low rope taken from the trail. Cale Rusk had disappeared, but his horse was found near Harker's south range, with matching rope in the saddlebag. Silas Bell rose. This is theater. The ledger was written by a dead clerk who resented successful men. These supposed originals could have been created by anyone. Miriam faced him. Then you will have no trouble explaining the county seal pressed into each page, or the bank receipts carrying your private stamp. Ada handed the records to Judge Harlan. The judge compared them with Bell's filed copies. Dates had changed. Loan amounts had doubled. Signatures had been traced onto false deeds. A low murmur moved through the church. Ruth Bellamy took the witness chair. Her voice shook as she read part of her father's letter. Bell's attorney asked why a good daughter would hide such a letter for months. Because Sheriff Voss opened my mail, Ruth said. Because every person who questioned the bank lost work, land, or safety. Because I watched what this town did to Miriam when she asked questions. That answer silenced the room more completely than any gavel. Tomas Ortega testified next. Then the Webbs. Then the old trapper who had seen Aaron ride with Voss. Each account fitted the records. What had looked like separate misfortunes became one clear design. During a short recess, Elliot noticed two of Harker's riders moving toward the side door where the witnesses waited. He and the territorial marshals stepped between them. There was no fight. Elliot did not touch his weapon. He simply stood in the narrow doorway and said, "No one here will be frightened into silence again." The riders looked at the marshals and backed away. When the hearing resumed, Miriam placed Aaron's torn survey bag on the table. She showed the judge the piece of Harker's coat found inside. Bram Harker laughed too loudly. "Every rancher in the territory owns a brown coat," he said. "Not every coat is missing 2 buttons cut from the same private mold," Miriam answered. She held up the brass buttons. Each bore a small letter H, surrounded by a rope design. Harker's coat, hanging behind his chair, had 2 newer buttons on the lower front. The older buttons above them matched Aaron's exactly. Harker's face darkened. "That proves Kessler grabbed my coat sometime. It does not prove where. You told me you had not seen Aaron for a month before his death," Miriam said. "Now you admit he came close enough to tear your coat. Which statement should the judge believe?" For the first time, Harker had no quick answer. Sheriff Voss stood. "This has gone far enough. The woman has poisoned frightened people with stories. I served this valley for 12 years. Are you truly going to take her word over mine?" He pointed at Miriam, as if she were something unclean. "Look at her. She hid in a kitchen for 3 years, feeding on grief and turning it into suspicion. Her own husband kept secrets from her. What kind of marriage was that?" Pain moved through Miriam, sharp and familiar. Voss saw it and smiled. Elliot began to rise, but Miriam lifted one hand. He stopped. She looked at the sheriff. "You counted on people looking at me instead of the evidence. You counted on every joke making me smaller. You counted on my husband's secrecy, meaning he did not love me. But Aaron kept secrets because he knew men like you would use me to reach him. He hid the ledger in the one place your pride would never let you search. My kitchen." Miriam turned toward the crowded benches. "Sheriff Voss is right about one thing. I stayed quiet for 3 years. Many of you heard lies about Aaron and said nothing. Many watched families lose land and decided it was safer not to ask why. Cruelty taught me to doubt myself, and silence gave these men room to work. I cannot change those years, but I can speak now. So can all of you." Mrs. Vale rose near the rear of the church. Her face was pale. "I saw Silas Bell enter the cookhouse that morning, with Sheriff Voss and Bram Harker," she said. "I returned for my account book and heard them mention Gann's north pasture. I left because I was afraid. When Miriam disappeared, I told myself it was not my concern." Another man stood. He had repaired the bank stove the previous winter and seen a drawer filled with blank deeds, already carrying official seals. A woman near the window said Harker paid her husband to burn an empty homestead after its owners were driven away. One voice called up another. The room that had once used its noise to shame Miriam now filled with truth. Silas Bell reached for his cane. Instead of standing, he twisted the silver handle. Elliot saw the narrow blade hidden inside and shouted a warning. A marshal caught Bell's wrist before he could move toward the evidence table. The blade struck the floor with a bright sound. The church erupted. Judge Harlan ordered everyone seated. 2 marshals placed Bell in restraints. Harker moved toward a window, but ranchers whose deeds he had stolen blocked his way. They did not strike him. They stood shoulder to shoulder until a marshal took his arm. Sheriff Voss remained still. His badge shone in the light from the open door. "You cannot arrest me on the word of a cook," he said. Judge Harlan closed Aaron's ledger. "No, but I can order your arrest on evidence of attempted murder, land fraud, intimidation, conspiracy, and obstruction." Mrs. Kessler's work merely allowed the law to see what was placed before it. Voss looked at Miriam. The calm mask finally slipped. Aaron should have minded his own affairs. The words hung in the church. Judge Harlan's expression hardened. Let the record show that statement. Voss seemed to realize what he had admitted. He turned toward the door, but Elliot and a marshal stood there. Elliot did not look triumphant. He looked tired. I trusted you, he said. Voss lowered his gaze. That was useful. The marshal removed the sheriff's badge and led him away. Outside, the bright day felt almost unreal. People gathered in small groups, while officials sealed the bank and the sheriff's office. Harker's company records were taken under guard. Judge Harlan ordered temporary protection for every disputed homestead. He also sent riders to find the missing families named in Aaron's book. Miriam stood alone on the church steps, with her husband's ledger pressed to her chest. The crowd watched her differently now. Some faces held respect, others held shame. A few people approached with apologies. Wade Pritch came first. He removed his hat and turned it in both hands. Miriam, the things I said were low. I cannot take them back. No, she said. You cannot. He waited, perhaps hoping she would make his regret easier. Miriam did not. Mrs. Vale came next. I should have stopped them in my cookhouse. Yes, Miriam said. Her voice was not cruel. It was simply true. Forgiveness, she understood, did not have to arrive on the same day as justice. Elliot joined her after the last witness left the church. Judge Harlan found the medical report from Aaron's burial file, he said. Voss changed the final page. The original doctor's notes mentioned the wound behind his ear. Aaron's name will be cleared in the official record. Miriam closed her eyes. For 3 years, she had imagined this moment as a burst of victory. Instead, grief rose softly. Aaron was still gone. No ruling could bring back the sound of his key at their door, or the whistle that once followed her through the cookhouse. Justice could repair a lie. It could not repair time. May I walk with you? Elliot asked. Miriam nodded. They went to the small cemetery above town. Aaron's grave stood beneath a pine near the eastern fence. Miriam knelt, despite the damp ground, and traced his name on the stone. They know now, she whispered. I am sorry it took so long. Her tears came openly. A few townspeople had followed at a distance, but she no longer turned away from them. Let them see grief without calling it weakness. Let them understand what their laughter had covered. Elliot waited near the fence. He did not speak for her or place a hand on her shoulder. He gave her the quiet she chose, rather than the silence others had forced upon her. In the weeks that followed, Black Hollow changed in slow, uneven ways. The guilty men were taken to Helena for trial. Cale Rusk surrendered after learning Harker could no longer protect him. In exchange for a lesser charge, he described the ambush at Widow's Pass and admitted that Voss had struck Aaron during an argument on North Ridge. Harker's men had moved the body to make the death appear accidental. The account hurt Miriam, but it ended the last uncertainty. The stolen ranches were returned one by one. Ruth's father came home from Spokane on the first stagecoach of spring. He stepped down carrying a worn suitcase, and Ruth ran into his arms before the wheels had stopped moving. The Ortega family was found in Idaho. The Webbs burned their false loan notice in a wash basin behind their house. Judge Harlan needed someone to organize the recovered records until the county appointed a permanent clerk. He offered the work to Miriam. I am a cook, she said. You are the person who matched 9 years of altered deeds in 3 days. Cooking is honest work, Mrs. Kessler, but it is not the limit of your mind. Miriam accepted. Her new office occupied the front room of the former bank. The brass sign came down. The dark curtains were opened, and sunlight reached shelves that Belle had kept locked. Miriam arranged each deed by valley, range, and date. She made 3 copies of every transfer. 1 remained in the office, 1 went to the county court, and 1 belonged to the landowner. No person would again be told that paper remembered only what a powerful man desired. People still noticed Miriam's body when she walked down the street. Bodies did not become invisible merely because a judge respected the person inside them. A child once asked loudly why she was so big. Before the embarrassed mother could pull him away, Miriam smiled and said, "People grow in different shapes, just like the mountains." The answer satisfied him. Some adults took longer to learn. One afternoon, a traveling merchant entered the records office and asked for the man in charge. When Miriam said he was speaking to the landkeeper, his eyes moved over her in disbelief. "You?" "Yes," she said. "And if you want your claim filed before winter, you should begin by telling me your name." He did. Elliot came to town every Thursday. At first, he brought documents connected to the Blue Cedar Ranch. Later, he brought small reasons that were not reasons at all. A jar Ada wanted returned, a question about rainfall records, a book he thought Miriam might like. He never hurried her grief. He never spoke as if saving his life gave him a claim on hers. One evening, he found her locking the office beneath the first soft snow of the season. Black Hollow glowed with lamplight. The cookhouse chimney sent smoke straight into the still air. "Ada says you have refused 3 invitations to supper," he said. Ada asks, as if a meal were a court order. She has that gift. Miriam smiled and tucked the key into her pocket. Her blue scarf had been replaced by a deep green one Ruth gave her, though her dark hair still escaped around her face. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Not of you. Of needing anyone again." Elliot nodded. "That sounds reasonable. You are not going to argue. I spent 12 years trusting a sheriff who tried to kill me. I am in no position to criticize caution." Snow gathered on his shoulders. Miriam looked toward the cemetery hill, hidden now by the dark. Love for Aaron had not vanished. It had changed into something she carried, rather than something that held her in place. "I could come on Sunday," she said, "for supper. Ada will pretend not to be pleased. And you?" Elliot looked at her with the same steady respect he had shown in the barn, on the trail, and outside Aaron's grave. "I will be glad you chose to come." They walked together along the snowy street. When they passed the cookhouse, Wade Pritch looked through the window and quickly lowered his eyes. Miriam did not need his shame, and she did not need the town's new admiration to prove what she was worth. Those things belonged to them. Her life belonged to her. At the road leading toward Blue Cedar, Elliot offered his arm, because ice had formed beneath the snow. Miriam took it, not because she needed to be carried, and not because he wished to rescue her. They supported one another across the uncertain ground. By the following summer, a new sign hung above Miriam's office. It read, "Black Hollow Land Records, every claim open to its owner." Beneath the words was a small brass compass set inside a circle, copied from Aaron's broken one. Ranch families came from across the valley to sit at Miriam's desk. She explained each line before anyone signed. She read documents aloud for those who could not read. She refused gifts from wealthy men and waived copying fees for families recovering stolen land. On the anniversary of the hearing, the town council placed a stone marker near Widow's Pass. They wanted to carve Elliot's name into it because he had protected the witnesses. Elliot refused unless Miriam's name appeared first. Miriam refused unless the names of every displaced family appeared beside hers. In the end, the marker carried no hero's name. It said only, "Here the people of this valley chose truth over fear. May we choose it sooner next time." Miriam stood before the marker at sunset with Elliot beside her. Wind moved through the tall grass, and the mountains rose purple and gold beyond the pass. She thought of the morning she had stepped in front of his horse. At the time, she believed courage meant feeling no fear. Now she knew courage was fear, given a direction. "Do you ever wish you had ridden past me?" she asked. Elliot considered the question. "I wish you never had to risk yourself to make me listen. But no, I am grateful you stood in the road. I nearly frightened Ash to death." He recovered. "He has become very proud of the story." Miriam laughed. The sound surprised her with its ease. Elliot held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him. There was no promise in the gesture that she had not chosen, no demand hidden beneath kindness. Only an invitation. She took his hand. Below them, lights appeared one by one in Black Hollow. The town had not become perfect. No town ever did. There were still careless words, old grudges, and people who preferred easy stories to difficult truth. But the records office remained open. Witnesses no longer entered through back doors. A widow who had once been treated as part of the kitchen now guarded the history of the valley. Miriam had wanted revenge when she learned the truth about Aaron. She had imagined Harker afraid, Bell ruined, and Voss stripped of his badge. Those things happened, yet they did not heal her by themselves. Healing came when Ruth found her father, when families walked back onto their land, and when Aaron's true name was spoken in public without pity. It came each time Miriam met her own eyes in a window and did not look away. The people of Black Hollow once believed Miriam Kessler's sighs made her weak, her grief made her foolish, and her silence meant she had nothing to say. They learned too late that she had been listening while they laughed. She remembered every altered date, every frightened face, and every truth powerful men assumed would remain hidden. In the end, Miriam did not defeat them with a weapon or answer cruelty with cruelty. She opened a ledger, raised her voice, and gave other frightened people the courage to raise theirs. And when the mountain wind moved down through the pass, it no longer sounded to Miriam like a warning. It sounded like pages turning, doors opening, and a life that finally belonged to the woman living it.